everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crossroads. In fact, the last episode for 2019. So, I'm going to get right down to it. We are, and by we, I mean Kristen Jeffers, the Black Urbanist, and I are talking about hog waste. Thus, the very crude title of this episode, Poo Lagoon. You're going to hear a lot of information about North Carolina politics, and of course, this subject based upon an article that I've provided in the show notes. I encourage everyone to read that article as you're listening to the episode, maybe after you listen, to get an idea of the topics and some of the points that we're making based upon what was outlined in that article. Forewarning, and full disclosure, your girl is a homeowner now, and I'm adjusting to the sounds, I'm adjusting to the animals, I'm adjusting to everything. So my sound quality in this episode is not the best, and I promise in the coming year, in 2020, among these many, many things that I want to accomplish, of course, providing not only quality content, but quality sound is of the utmost importance to me. So I wanted to let everyone know that ahead of this episode. And thank you to everyone that is listening in spite of. You are going to be very blessed. All right, let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Crossroads, or should I say the Crossroads meets Kristen Jeffers show. So today I have Kristen with me, not physically, but with me in the studio to talk about hog waste. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and her show, and we're going to chop it up.
Awesome. Again, Kristen Jeffers, the Black Urbanist radio show. This would be probably episode 11 of my show. If you're listening, my listeners, I would have already introduced this. But here we are. We're actually in studio finally. Again, as some of you may remember, and I'm actually going to release both of these episodes together. Rashida is my mentee that I've been mentoring. I mentioned her in my newsletter just recently, and tonight I'm coming back on, or at least whenever you're listening. I forget these are podcasts. You can listen whenever you want to, anywhere. I'm back here to talk specifically about hog waste in my home state of North Carolina. But in the meantime, you can check me out, www.theblackurbanist.com. I have my weekly newsletter. About every Friday, I release a newsletter, and you can get that newsletter on the website. You can also subscribe to the MailChimp edition, and if you pay $1 on Patreon, you can get it sometimes it's an hour earlier, sometimes it's a day earlier, and sometimes you'll get more pictures and more bonus content. But yeah, I have been at this for almost a decade now, thinking about how place intersects with my blackness and my North Carolinianness, and now that I'm out and open about my queerness, also how that intersects as well. So that's me in a nutshell, at least for this period, and you're going to hear me throughout the hour. So
okay, so let's get right into this. So you found this article on Propublica about hog waste and just the legislation, the history of hog waste in North Carolina, which is no short stint. And this is interesting to me because I did a little research on something that's equally prevalent in the state of North Carolina, which is the overflowing of coal ash ponds.
Oh,
so, yeah. So what was reading this article, what was your immediate reaction?
It brought back just some memories of just the process. Now, for the record, we will put this in our individual show notes. This is a ProPublica article that came out about a year ago. But the issue around this hog waste has been going on now for several years. Just a quick explainer. So basically, you have a lot of hog farms in North Carolina. When tobacco was sued out of the state, pretty much, a lot of people who used to farm tobacco picked up hogs as their next crop. Now, there's been always been cases of people since the times of slavery and sharecropping, raising hogs on their property. But over the years, we become one of the chief places, especially in the eastern part of the state, to be be major hog producers. And in this particular case, it was Smithfield, which is now under a Chinese conglomerate. But at the time, Smithfield was very much a Virginia-based company that had a lot of operations in North Carolina. And there's a lot of pride around those hogs and the farming and the story of, we couldn't farm this thing, now we're farming that thing. And, we're happy about that. But some of us are really not happy about the smell. And we have these things called hurricanes, and occasionally hurricanes flood things. And since we've decided to dispose of our hog waste in lagoons, which of course are essentially ponds, since we dispose of our waste of these hogs and ponds, and occasionally hurricanes wash up and wash it all around and swirl it in our drinking water and our well water. And then on top of that, we also have the situation where our you already smell these log lagoons, not even getting into what happens. And this is mostly the corporate farms. Now, there are people do this privately, but there's small numbers of hogs and pigs, and it's not as big of a deal. But the main thing about this was that it was corporate. And when the article talked about just how much of this was cultural, I remember that. Until reading up on this article, it was just a thing of, just like you mentioned the coal ash, I was like, the hog waste. Now, right. I used to do a newsletter called North Carolina Placebook, and it's something that I've considered bringing back eventually in some form or fashion. And when I was doing that newsletter, it was during the time that the coal ash situation was becoming more prominent. Obviously, just like the hog waste disposal, what's happening here, instead of big hog, as it were, a big farm, big agriculture, big power was storing coal ash in certain ponds and not disposing of it properly, right. And they were getting taken to task of doing it. In this period of time, there were also a lot of corporate mergers. I do remember how much of this was a political issue. The article mentions how this became
an enormous political issue.
Well, of course. But I remember being 12 and 13, being this nerd, getting interested in politics, remembering turning on the TV, and this was top news. And this was back in the day when, even back in the day, 20 years ago being 1998, 1999, where it wasn't so much about entertainment, even on the local news front. Internet was there, but it was still a little nascent. TV was still at least trying to give people something that wasn't just super entertaining. But then again, when you're talking about something that is about a fourth, or sometimes if not half, or 75% of North Carolinians' diets at the time, then yeah, you're going to get a lot of attention on it. And yeah, it's not surprising that it was a campaign issue. And it's also not surprising the way that it was handled and the way responsibility was shifted. So right. That's what to answer this question properly, instead of going on my usual tangent here, I definitely felt like, oh wow, this happened. And then I remembered the Florence hurricane, and I remember how it came back into the news. And of course, when this article originally released, I'm like, oh great. Mm-hmm. Among other things that are going on in this state.
Right.
We're back at this again.
Yeah.
So
that, when I read this, I wasn't, I guess when I first heard about hog waste, I didn't think about it. And I guess it's mostly because I just started not eating meat. So what was going on in that particular realm, I just didn't pay attention to. But my connection to it is that my family is from Virginia, and members of my family have worked for Smithfield. So, we've always known about it. It's been it's a prideful thing, that we have that business, and that's one of the things that Virginia is known for. But, now, as I've gone through like learning more about in this particular case for me, coal ash, it does not surprise me that this also happened, particularly when you read, and as the article shows, the way that that hog waste, which is not just poop, y'all, it's pee and poop, that go into
Mm-hmm.
open pits. Like, do you hear what I'm saying? And then
Woo!
there's
Yeah.
parts in this article where a woman is talking about being unable, a resident that is living next to this particular facility in Dublin County is getting sprayed with shit. I mean, let's just say it. There are people in this country who are being sprayed with feces, and
Yes.
they are unable to open their windows and open their doors, which is something that I touched on when I talked about Robert Bullard's book Dumping in Dixie, where these horrible Lulus, locally unwanted land use, like these areas are put specifically in Black and brown communities,
Yeah.
and they are killing people and causing adverse health issues, and it has to be addressed. Like,
It, yes. Yes, absolutely. And what's so stinging about this? There's so many just sort of multiverses here. If you look at Eastern North Carolina, what we consider Eastern North Carolina is just east of Raleigh, pretty much. It's not as much of a big deal now that the fault line is a thing. The highways have been over top of it. But years and years ago, you literally had to, it took you a while, and there were only really designated areas you could use to climb over the fault line. It was kind of like going up in the mountains, but you were still kind of in a more flatter area. It still wasn't completely mountainous. And so that's essentially what you have in North Carolina is you have the three distinctive, some would say four if you count the Outer Banks as its own distinctive ecosystem, but you have roughly 3 or 4 distinctive ecosystems in the state of North Carolina. You have the mountain areas, everything around Asheville, and so many people, Asheville's kind of the center of the universe, but there's a whole set of mountain communities. There's still native lands that are there in the mountains. In addition, you had the central part of the state, which is what we used to call the urban crescent, partly because Charlotte, Raleigh, the Raleigh region, the RTP region, the Charlotte region, and then the Piedmont Triad, the Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point region are all within, you can get to Charlotte and Raleigh within 3.5 hours of each other. And so if you're used to living places where you're sitting in traffic jams going a mile every 30 minutes, this sounds pretty enticing because you actually, except for when we do have a little bit of a rush hour or there's a wreck on the interstate, you can definitely get between the 3 jurisdictions. And then train service runs between Charlotte and Raleigh via Greensboro. Now you do have to bus if you want to go to any other jurisdiction outside of some of those areas, but there's a core of what we would say core of urbanism in the middle, as well as hills, as well as some degree of farming, but it's not, you don't have as many family farms. A lot of the farms in the central part of the state are booming because of things like Whole Foods and other organic groceries and the farmers market boom. They are booming. That's the extent of their farming. Likewise with the mountain communities, their farming was just because of land space, their farming was looking different. Yes, your Christmas tree is probably coming from the North Carolina mountains, but outside of that, that's that context. That's what's happening. And so down east, as we call it, east of the fault line, east of Raleigh, and even Raleigh itself, before it was built up to being the Triangle region, the Research Triangle, it was just open farmland. It was red clay farmland, and the Research Triangle was created to try to diversify these farmlands. However, and the article says this, you will not get, they said that you won't get an Amazon or any other tech company to move down there, which is, I don't think that...
I don't agree.
Me either. You go ahead and talk about why you don't agree with that.
I don't agree because, as someone who has family in pretty country areas, I've seen other business, and I'm not saying this is the answer or the solution by any means, but I have seen large-scale companies set up shop in a specific distance away from an urban city like Louisville. There's tons of companies that have warehouses there. And maybe if he's talking about something that's not just warehouse, maybe, if he was talking about other forms and types of jobs, I don't necessarily agree with that either. There's lots of examples of cities that are small that have grown into their own self-sustained ecosystem. So it's not true. And I wish I understand where that person is coming from. I understand that, when your skills are limited, your access to things, and you're at a distance from major cities, it is a little bit harder. It can be more challenging. But that's something that's the beauty of a small town, is that you all can decide what you should do or how you should cultivate your community to make the message whatever you want it to be. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I 100% agree with that, because what I didn't get to mention was that Eastern North Carolina does have cities. It has three major military installations. It has Wilmington, which was a major port city. New Bern, also a major port city. A lot of Black history tied into both New Bern and Wilmington. A lot of people do look up Wilmington and know about some issues there around Black self-sufficiency. And that may be why there's this thought that, that Down East is not going to be successful, because the elephant in the room with a lot of this is that a lot of these communities are Black communities that are being shat on.
Mm-hmm.
And also, famously so, during Hurricane Floyd, the community of Princeville, which is another one of the more well-known all-Black towns, all-Black self-determinant towns that had some degree of success, it was devastated then. And a lot of the media outlets back then used Princeville as a showpiece of what was happening during those particular flooding areas. And so, and another thing I wanted to mention is there's NC State University, my alma mater, is mentioned several times in this article.
Yes, it is.
It is we are the flagship for agriculture. Now, we're a state that has a dual flagship, and people will fight me over this. I can just hear all the Chapel Hill people coming to me telling me that y'all are not the flagship. Save it for the football field, save it for the basketball court, save it for sports. But we actually, the UNC system, the way that works is a 16 campus system. Each campus is still public. It still has the benefits, but there are certain things that each campus doesn't do. And there's also, in the state of North Carolina, several HBCUs as well as Native serving campuses that are also engaged in the, this university system. UNC Pembroke started out as what we used to call normal schools, effectively teaching schools, and it started out for the Native, namely Lumbee, a tribe that's recognized in North Carolina but not quite federally, but it's for the Native community there. You have NCA&T, famously. We all knew about that. We saw that semi-depicted in Drumline. They changed their location a little bit, but it was very much the same colors. They claimed the greatest homecoming on earth, so you may have heard about that. But yeah, but you have all these institutions that are able to create jobs, that are able to create incubators. Elizabeth City State University is in the far northeastern corner of the state, ties into Hampton Roads, which is technically part of Virginia, but it's still a major urban center, and you just drive over the line. Then you have UNC Wilmington, you have universities out west in Asheville, in far corners of the state. And so NC State is our agriculture flagship, as it were, but there's ability for people to communicate and to do things across campuses and to work with each other. And NC State in particular, not only do they have this particular professor who studied and who is charged with studying the solution to these hog lagoons, they also have a whole department that's based on industry that goes into all across the states called industry. I think it's Industry Expansion Solutions. They've changed the acronym a little bit. I worked for them. Full disclosure, my uncle leads this group, but this is a group that's specifically, effectively manufacturing extension, like agricultural extension, which both of these areas were created to help people make sense of what their land looked like, make sense of what their resources were. And that's available as a public resource. Sometimes it's fee-based, sometimes it's not. It's available as a resource to people throughout the state. So to get back to your point of not being able to establish anything anywhere, I do believe anything can happen anywhere. I just tweeted about how RTP could have been put anywhere and how it's the lack of not having anything but the office parks in there was purposed and planned. Just like, I like how this Propublica article talks openly about how a lot of what we see and happening down east, a lot of the lingering resentments over land use and who gets to have land and who gets to be, I guess, bought out by Smithfield, or who wants to be part of that, or even maybe who gets to work there, or how they're treated and how farming is seen as glorified. It all does go back to the colonization and then later on the enslavement of peoples on the land, and then moving into sharecropping, and now moving into what we have now where there is private ownership. But there are barriers to entry and there are distance barriers. I wouldn't say there are technological barriers. The internet exists everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's completely ruled there, but there's definitely a degree to which maybe people may feel like they're not as advanced, or they may feel like they're not safe. There is it is still very much a traditional Christian environment, and then racially it's still very much black, white, but I know there's been a lot of immigrant communities that have come in and taken advantage of empty real estate and been given that advantage. And so on this ramble, I just say there's a lot of resources here. Don't even believe for one moment that this is an area that is 100% completely rural, completely isolated from everything, and does not have the opportunity to be whatever it wants to be. So, with that being said, it's definitely, and I'll let you jump in on this, Rashida, to talk about your thoughts on the fact that this was pushed into an academic realm and the person working on this was even allowed to retire before there was really a solution.
So what's interesting, like what really jumped out for me, and something I just really wanted to just say in general, is that, this is, when we talk about regulation and regulatory bodies, particularly at the federal level and all the way on down, is that it's not so much that the government is supposed to be helping to keep us safe in the way that we would like to think. It's more about how bad can it be before it actually kills people. And let's find that point, and that's where we'll stay. So, the fact that in this article, states a couple of things. First, that it was a cheaper solution to use lagoons than anything else. And that was just how everyone felt. It didn't matter. And yes, it was economically cheaper. But look at the damage that it caused. And instead of actually trying to figure out what would not, and they use words like in the article, for instance, when they're talking about the strategy, Smithfield strategy for managing or prevent, or not even so much preventing. They used the word mitigate. They didn't say prevention. This is our plan to prevent this from happening again. They just said we have a plan in place to manage it if it should happen, something, a hurricane comes on down, and that's it. And that's not. So basically, you're going to do what is pretty much is a commonplace, where it's we're going to worry about cleaning it up in some form or fashion, which, just by the way, does not fully eliminate the threat of contamination in your groundwater. That's the solution. It's just, we're just going to stop right here at this point where it won't kill people and just kind of hope for the best. And that's the government. And then these corporations like Smithfield just say, well, we'll have a plan to sort of manage it after shit hits the fan. Yeah. So I just really wanted to just kind of throw that out. And then also, from a federal level, from a legislative perspective, and this is why I keep saying I really want everyone to get involved locally. In your local government, get to know your delegates, get to know your everybody, get to know whoever has got a sign in the yard, get to know that person, because that is how we start to change how we move and how we go forward. We have to do that by getting involved. So like this plan I believe this is the Smithfield's plan, or is it the government's plan? But basically, the overall. So basically, let me give you some context. Let me back this truck up because I'm getting excited. So when the hurricane happens, right? So this most recent hurricane in North Carolina, Florence, which not only did it tip over the poop ponds, but also the coal ash ponds too. That the plan to fix it or to mitigate it, so to speak, didn't really have anything tangible associated with it. Meaning that there was nothing specific to say, this is how much you have to do. You have to clean this. The water has to be of this purification. Nothing. So what does that leave room for? It leaves room for interpretation, and we can already tell that these corporations only care about what is going to be the cheapest. So what kind of plan do you think they're going to come up with to clean this up? You know what I mean? So like that, I don't even know if that answers your question, girl, but that's just what's on my mind when I read this article. I'm just like, what? So does that even answer your question? Probably not.
I just wanted you, I of course, because everybody who knows me, when it comes to anything related to my home state and the place we live in, it's like, and the place I've lived in, or at least for the first 28 years of my life, it just, when I was in the thick of it, it was like being sometimes in the middle of a Hog Lagoon. There were so many things that were happening to us at the time. And looking back now, and of course, going to school and doing my public policy and public administration study in the state at one of the top schools for doing so, with the sole purpose of eventually, in my case, I just wanted to I wanted a backbone of sense of place. I was fascinated with how you have something like an RTP that was literally empty land with office parks in it, individual office parks, and then we're complaining about traffic congestion and heat islands, and literally this dead center almost of the state is literally just empty land with a couple of office buildings sprinkled around it. Right. And then thinking about back to this whole hog situation, it's been something that's been news kind of since I was conscious enough to be paying attention. Like Rashida said, I think it's very important to be involved locally. I've been keeping up with council meetings in Greensboro since I was probably 7 or 8. My father and I, and this is going to sound so North Carolinian, so Southern. My father and I would actually go partake of the Great Pig at this local joint called Stamey's next to the Greensboro Coliseum. There would be this paper out front called the Rhinoceros Times. It's now the Rhino Times. It has always been a conservative-leaning paper. But for the longest time, it had better coverage of local proceedings. Now, for a period of time, I want to give a shout-out to Joe Killian and Amanda Leonard Killian, both a husband and wife team who came on board at the News and Record and really brought a level of dignity and professionalism to the coverage at our major daily newspaper. And then we also added in Yes Weekly, and then some of the folks from Yes Weekly split off to create Triad City Beat. So by now, there's a lot of abundance of people reporting. Now, the Leonard Killians are no longer with that paper, but she's involved on the inside doing public information. He's actually with an organization called NC Policy Watch. NC Policy Watch serves as effectively a Propublica specifically for the state of North Carolina. So this is something that they've covered and have been covering for years. Back when a major daily like the News and Observer in Raleigh would be willing to get a Pulitzer for this. Not to say that they aren't doing it now, but you start to see the effects of media companies being bought out by entities that also have a stake in things like these things. And but back in 1995, it was me and my dad going to the Stamey's. We pick up these alt weeklies, we pick up the News and Record. They're reporting about this hog waste situation, and I'm just like, oh, of course, why would you want hog waste just laying around? Why would they put it in water? Like, this just doesn't make sense for me anyway. Why are we fighting over this? And then to read this article in preparation for this conversation, and just to read that all they did was, okay, we don't want to deal with it. It's an election year. We're going to put this off on NC State. They know, they're smart. They know how to fix it. You know, we're going to put this poor little man, he's going to be the researcher, and he's going to have to do this. And to think about when he talked about in that article, waiting years to have hearings, and I got hives. Now you talk about how I felt about reading this. I got hives thinking about how long it took. He would write something, and he might write a paragraph, and maybe he would write a paragraph and get to go home to his family, get to go eat, you know, go to Smithfield also does. I think they still have individual restaurants. It's not just cutting up meat and selling it at the grocery stores and other restaurants, but they do also have restaurants of their own. But there's also some, you know, phenomenal like restaurants that do serve up the pig in that region. And we're not even gonna get into whether or not, you know, we both I'm at the point where I'm weaning myself, but that's a whole thing there. And but I do think about processing. I think about things like this. I think about how these producing animals in mass and in humane ways does affect not only just the ecosystem and what you put into your body, but what you spray out. And so here's this man sitting in his little office on campus. He gets to just kind of be put away from it, but he's still hoping to have an actual conversation. And the kicker to this, the real punch of this story is they had plenty of time to get together a solution.
All they had, this agreement was signed, this Smithfield Agreement, right?
Yeah.
Which gave them authority over the land that they were on, you know, mitigating any issues. Am I hitting it? Like, this plan is this was written in the year 2000. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Okay, so they've had, they would have had 25 years to come up with something.
Yeah.
Anything.
And the thing is, you pointed out earlier in the conversation, mitigate was the issue. So they're already not protecting or preventing or encouraging us to find something else. Just like we found something else with tobacco.
Right.
We could very much find something else when it comes to hog waste and hogs in general. But we're not even there yet. I mean, I don't know where these Impossible Burgers and things like that are being grown.
Robots?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I doubt that they're getting, North Carolina farmers, especially the black farmers, are getting opportunities to tap into the alternative farm economies that are sustainable. Even with soy is problematic for a lot of folks who produce estrogen. And, you know, that's kept a lot of people, including my partner, from being able to engage with not eating as much meat. I myself am a little bit soy sensitive, so I'm already like, okay, how do we make this work so that you're not consuming that? But still, you had time to come, just like there's a time, somebody's had time to come up with solutions to soy burgers.
Right.
And somebody had a solution to come up with to replace tobacco. They actually, unlike other industries, the furniture industry kind of was left behind when it outsourced. Textiles was left behind for a while. But this industry had plenty of time and a university appointment and university money and someone who, it was his job, he was getting a salary regardless, to research and actually put this out. And so he probably had a plan within 2 weeks. Okay, this is 1995, so maybe he had a plan within like a month or so, considering that. But NC State's they've had wired internet for, almost 30 years. They were one of the first institutions in the state to have internet. So, yeah, I mean, they're a college campus, and that's one of the things, the internet, when it came off of military bases, it went to college campuses next. So he has had access to he has a phenomenal library in the D.H. Hill complex. He has the resources. He could call up anybody and say, hey, I'm an agricultural researcher from NC State. Please give me some information. People would give it to him because that's just the pride in the school and the pride in the fact that this is what they do. So he probably had a plan, but He had to wait until the General Assembly and the governor's office and whoever was the state agencies decided to hear this. He had to have Smithfield made him put and the government made him put all these other people in the room with him to decide. And not to say that he had all the answers, but the way it sounded like there were way too many people signing off on something that was very simple technology.
Yeah. And instead of actually doing the hard task of taking the time to thoroughly think and plan things through, something that we didn't really quite touch on and is bringing into I think we have though, is really talking about this from an economic perspective, as well, because this, the hog industry is a pretty sizable portion of North Carolina's revenue, right? To eliminate this, because it's very easy for folks who are in the sustainability community to just talk about getting rid of shit, but to talk about that's a sizable loss, right? But and I think that has, of course, and without doubt, trumped why there hasn't been larger strides made to create a solution for this, and it just, so that's something I just wanted to bring it up and talk about. But also I want to go back to the food, because you've mentioned that you have sensitivity to soy, right? And another episode that I'm planning out and planning for is to really talk about this being vegan or having a plant-based diet. I think there's a lot of tensions around it, but I think some of the things that we also really have to address that aren't specific to people's perspective is that not everyone's diet is set up to be plant-based or fully plant-based, and that could be financial, but it also can be health too. And I want to call that out and call that up, because that's important, to talk about also when we talk about, the change of diet. And in that vein, it's not just that, I would eat meat. I would probably eat meat if I knew that the animals were not being kept like slaves, in these fucking tin house lean-tos with no room to move around in shit. In shit. And they are not hopefully, I don't know how much time people spend looking at animals hanging out and odd couples of animals, like a cow and a dog that are friends like I do, and that's fine. Don't judge my internet life, but I see that animals have feelings. It's not, I know the Disney thing, there's a difference. They're not singing, but they show emotion. So they are completely aware of the fact that they are in something that is not awesome. And that's, we eat that. That's what people eat. And that has that, and some people would say that plays a part in your behavior or your outputs or whatever. But the long short of that is just basically to say I wanted to call into this conversation also of food and kind of getting, as we were kind of talking about it, getting into also the environmental effects too. That's something else we really haven't quite fully gotten into, about what's actually happening when this poop water gets into our groundwater and introduces nitrates, which is, people hear that and they're like, oh, I don't know what that, and they think it's they don't really have any context for it. So the nitrates they're from multiple sources, but it's coming from the poop. It also comes from fertilizer as well. So the issue obviously with that is that, that part of that waste that is basically that the company is recycling to spray on their grounds, that's seeping into the groundwater. And that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about groundwater, it's basically the water that's coming in down from the ground and seeping into the aquifers and flowing out into our main source of drinking water. And the problem with this is, if you correct me if I'm wrong, this is around Cape, is this around Cape Fear? Or is it one of the estuaries there?
Actually, specifically, this is Duplin County, which again is one of the counties down east. But there's several eastern North Carolina counties that are adjacent to several waterways.
Okay.
There's really not a waterway in eastern North Carolina that hasn't been touched or affected, and that's been made worse with the hurricanes that are spread. But it is important to bring this up because it's not only one of the first things that we talked about for most of the time that we've talked is just the government inefficiency and yielding to corporate interests, and corporate interests donating to certain candidates to keep things silent, and people not wanting to touch it because it's giving people money. It's an economic driver. People that this is their livelihoods. But on the flip side, there's also a pride, again, it's a pride in eating it. And there haven't been, for a lot of people, they haven't really been able to come up with other options. People are willing to eat, I think if it's cooked right, people are willing to eat other things. But there's a degree to which, and this comes up a lot, some people do try to go vegan, but they end up having more health problems.
Right.
Members of the animal kingdom also consume each other, and they have no regard for whether or not that's they're humane, but of course they are not us as humans. We get the choice of discernment, but there's also just, and I guess it all goes back to options. How do we help people? How does, say, something like a cooperative extension help people make sense of the changes in farming? And then on top of that, one thing we've scraped the surface of is the fact that a lot of residents that are in the most worst grounds are Black and brown individuals. Yes. You have brown, and when I mean brown here, I mean people who have immigrated from countries of Latin America, and then some cases the Caribbean. People who identify dually as both Latino or Hispanic, as well as Black or African or white or some other European, but mainly, and then also there's a lot of indigenous folks, people who have more characteristics with Native Americans. So essentially just kind of clearing that up there, but still you have folks who are being brought over to work, and that's been something that's been happening for years. We've always had a large migrant farm worker population, and years ago a lot of those people were offered the opportunity to, not when they were off season, they didn't have to go back to where they came from. They could actually establish a degree of residency, and people actually helped them become permanent residents and not be at the mercy of things like ICE. But now that's changing. That's been something, even before this administration, that's been something that's been back of mind politically for a lot of Latino immigrants into farm workers, whether or not their organization, the company that's brought them here, will allow them to stay. If something were to happen to that company, if something were to happen to that farm or farm processing factory, what would happen to them and their families? They have definitely changed the character of our state, I think, for good. But there have been several issues, things I happen to have a chance to research in grad school around how the Latino boom has affected North Carolina, and namely those who are migrant workers, working class, immigrating to work in service industries and start service level businesses. And then you roll back to, there is an indigenous native population to North Carolina that gets affected by this. There's some degree of protection that the state offers them, but some of those communities only have state level protection and not federal level protection, and some of the federal level things that they get to help. So, if they're also hog farmers, then if the hog farm goes away, what else is left there? And then you're dealing with fighting white organizations or racist organizations, and then of course the Black community who started off enslaved, and then in some cases, and then moved into sharecropping, and then some were able to purchase that land outright. And then Propublica also has a whole series on how certain Black families down east are being victimized by certain laws, and it's really statewide, but there are specific laws in North Carolina that allow for deeds to be taken, allow for lands to be seized. And it's something, thinking about how Smithfield, how the Smithfield article mentions how there's several affiliate farms. I wonder honestly how many of those affiliate farms were grafted into the Smithfield Lagress because they were offered, these were Black farmers offered money to let go of something that was becoming a burden to them. They weren't offered a fair shake at creating. think about the black farmers who had the smarts and the ability. North Carolina A&T is also a land grant agricultural university, so they're both started because black people could not enroll full-time at NC State University, so they started a separate one, and so we effectively have two agricultural universities in the state system now, both working together, but because of segregation, because of racism, at one point in time, these institutions were separate and not working together and not quite equal. But now you think about, we were able to start an academic institution. But what if we had ever wanted to start a major farming operation? And then are we even able to step in and be part of the future of whatever we're farming next?
Mm-hmm. And that's something like, sorry to cut you off. That's that's something that like really is a discussion that needs to be held. And that needs to be, and something else that you touched on about like the towns and a lot of counties, especially the ones that are documented as having issues with environmental burdens. Some of them are unincorporated, not all of them, but some of them are unincorporated, and that gets into the other issue that this brings of land use, just like, and even in some of the areas, like specifically I'm thinking about in Dallas with the issue of the lead smelter, that land was owned by the state. And still they did nothing for 50 years. So even in that case, it's not so much that, by being unincorporated, you are vulnerable. You can still be vulnerable as a person living under supposed governed by your state, and that's also a part of just like the insecurity around Black space, Black communities, that we have just, from every single angle, are suffering in some manner. And, here we are, of course, talking about this as an environmental justice, issue.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with NC politics or even Virginia politics, as Rashida is, jurisdictional boundaries and jurisdictional rules and what jurisdictions do varies sometimes within the state. But each state has a different degree as to what they allow to be done locally. Unincorporation means different things state by state. And depending on who has been in power on a local level, there are people that still have families that own them that are still in power. Anybody who watches Queen Sugar, and I really like how that show portrays the rural context and how rural Black lives and rural ownership and how all those things connect together in a modern world. It's not we didn't just all leave the farms and go to cities, and the smartest people didn't all leave rural areas. Some people have gone to schools like NCA&T and even NC State, and they've decided to come back to their homelands, and it's not their fault that their homeland didn't grow as fast as certain other homelands, that they didn't establish massive industrial movements, that they're not the end of the line as far as production of goods. They just happen to be the beginning of the line.
Right.
And so that's just something that we have to think about. And so in North Carolina, there are 100 counties, and in those 100 counties, you have a smattering of towns and cities. Each one of them has a county seat. For the most part, school systems overlay the county line. For the most part, the health department, the judicial system are handled at the county level. Cities and towns can choose to exist, and people can choose to incorporate themselves in a city or town. And some people have started to do this because they don't necessarily want to be annexed into a bigger place. But in reality, when you look at some of the smaller towns in eastern North Carolina, a lot of these places did have at least one finishing something. Like they were the marketplace for the farms, or they had a processing plant, or they had a railroad go through. But in the last 100, 200 years, some of these towns, like many across the country, have been irrelevant. But with North Carolina being positioned the way it is on the East Coast, with so many interstates and so much natural resource wealth, we're denser than a lot of other farm-only states. We're not as dense as LA County. LA County, California matches our population of the entire state, But if you compare us to, say, somewhere like a Kansas or even the Dakotas or Montana, our density is still much higher despite having all these swaths of farmland and mountainous areas and even hilly areas in the central part of the state. So I say all this to say jurisdictions do matter. It matters, again, not only getting involved, talking to people, getting to know how these jurisdictional boundaries work, but also understanding. And I wrote a post on this a while back. Probably one of my last true blog posts I wrote was, do you really know where you live and who governs you? If you call 911, who runs 911? Who runs the police department that would or potentially arrest you or evict you? Where do you go if you didn't put your kid in private school, or if you didn't attend a private school? Where would you go to school publicly? Even when it comes to state universities, what constitutes in state? How much will you pay? Are you going to pay as much as someone out of state? Or what schools, what programs constitute in state? If you are a member of some sort of protected class, do you have rights? North Carolina is a right to work state. So unionization, we have attempts at coming together. You've seen that with the teachers, but unionization is not completely legal in the state of North Carolina. And that's become an issue that's not wanting to be touched. North Carolina is a state that just left. They have had issues with their budget. They've had a lot of more conservative activity, and so we've not really had a proper state budget in several years, and so things have been cut out of said state budget over those years that we have been battling between having a state budget and not, and that's been something that's gone on for almost a decade now. We are not a state that's great on LGBTQ, and it goes beyond It goes beyond the bathroom. It started with the amendment that was baked into the Constitution that was negated by the Supreme Court. But if the Supreme Court overturned Oglethorpe, then we'd be back to marriage being null and void for people. They'd have to go out of state. Now, North Carolina would recognize any marriage of any type from another state, but you wouldn't be able to go to the courthouses anymore. And then on top of that, you have the cities are ready to move forward, but then you have the state general assembly that will tell a city that it wants to start controlling something just to mess with a city. It tried to punish Asheville for controlling its water system. It tried to take over the Charlotte Douglas Airport at the state level. Things that make no sense for the state to be doing in the way that they're doing. Now, there's state oversight as far as quality control, but that is the kind of jurisdictional things that are happening where you have the General Assembly taking over certain things. You have the General Assembly not wanting to expand Medicaid to give full LGBTQ rights. The rights that we've been given have been grafted on us at the federal level. Unemployment, there's holes there. You basically, I think what happened was the way the system was gutted that you have to, and I think there's also some issues around being able to sue for discrimination. You have to start with EEOC. You can't even start at the state level right now. There's been a slew of things that have happened, but on the flip side, because of those natural resources, because of that relative density, because of that proximity to things like I-95 and I-85, it has become a very attractive option. It started to be retiring there, but it became a very attractive option to attend school there or the university level. Out-of-state tuitions are pretty reasonable for based on out-of-state tuitions in other places for state schools.
True.
Then people come from out of state, they stay, and then their parents think about coming to stay. Instead of retiring in Florida, they think about retiring in North Carolina. There's a lot of empty real estate in some of the medium-sized towns that's ripe for people who are wanting to incubate smaller food businesses, smaller craft businesses, textiles. Of course, we have the legacy of furniture and textiles. We have all these wealth of economic drivers, and we have all four seasons, and we have all these natural resources. And if you're not, there are pockets of blueness, there are pockets of progressivity, and I may be biased because it is my home state, but
a little bit,
it's just like anybody who is understanding of the system, but it is well known there are people leaving other states to come to North Carolina. North Carolina is one of the top in-migration states, and while there's imperfections, if you can find one of those pockets of progressivity, because that pocket of progressivity is not only that, yeah, you can be, for example, my partner and I could get married and we could be thriving in certain situations. We could also get a decent plate of food.
Right.
And people, there's that old school culture of looking out, of kind of a togetherness that makes people across racial lines, that makes people think that we've solved certain racial issues.
Mm-hmm.
That happens in North Carolina. As long as you mention a church name, that kind of negates a lot of things. But if that church also happens to be anti-LGBTQ, then that sprinkles something else in there, or anti-feminist, or some other anti that kind of puts a wrench into the image of progressivism. Right. But redlining looks different in North Carolina. Gentrification looks different in North Carolina. Urban renewal, even factory farming looks different in our state. And those are things I think that should be considered when you're looking at not just the hog waste situation, but also the coal ash and just how our power companies are governed. But before we kind of close this conversation out, is there anything else specific to the coal ash issue you wanted to make sure we talked about tonight?
There's so much involved in, I swear I'm going to try to get better with posting these things and like writing about them. One thing I would say about about just coal ash and just what I've been really hammering home about getting involved with the legislative session is like, the legislator the legislating body that gets together, to discuss issues specific to the state. That entity dropped the ball with coal ash and really let Dominion power just do whatever it wanted to do. And it's interesting, and I was interested in this subject because my mom lives in North Carolina, and she calls me one day and is like, talking about how her bill's going to probably be higher because they're about the hurricane and this and that. And she said, you should really look into that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, and when I did, it's just that what really stood out to me, it's just like this company, I mean, it employs thousands of people, its skill levels vary as far as like what people are actually capable to do within the organization, but this is something that we see time and time again, not just in North Carolina. And North Carolina this is not something that is new, as we've already kind of touched on, that there are cases dating 30 years back that are issues that were issues and documented, and you can still see the fragments and the remnants of them today. And in particular with coal ash and why it is stressed and why I stress it so much is that much like these pits that hog waste is in, coal ash, which is basically what comes out of the stacks after the coal is converted into energy, and that comes out of the stack as some steam, but also like, as a byproduct. So this is coming out, and it is supposed to be captured in this giant like pool, basically. And the thing is that they're not all lined, which means that there's a liner in the inside that in theory is supposed to protect the water, basically, and people do. But not all of them were lined. And then, so that means that's one opportunity for contamination. But also, when the hurricane hit, as we talked about, all that waste, all that coal ash and stuff, like flows into the Cape Fear River Basin, which is a massive movie and everything. And every time I drive by it, I do the theme song like a weirdo in my car. But like, that is a major source of water. And so to contaminate that, it impacts so many communities. And like, this company had the much like we're talking about with Smithfield, was literally given free reign to figure it out. And meanwhile is causing chaos. I mean, we didn't even really so much get into this because it didn't seem like the specific article from ProPublica talked about any of the health ramifications. But like, that's another thing that has to be brought into this about, the physical body and the hazards that we are subjected to when corporations are allowed to figure out what they think the best solution to mitigate harmful, hazardous byproducts that can impact human life, And so I was upset about the article, of course, not surprised, and just really, it makes me want to go out and fight as usual, like I've been saying the last couple of episodes. That's my feelings, friend, you know?
Yeah, I had some, anytime I really get riled up about my home state, it's like, I feel like it's just because these are things that have just been happening. It's
Yeah.
because, and part of the context is, we were known for the being one of the more progressive southern states. It took us a while to integrate, but we did integrate schools.
True.
And then when we were integrating, even before then, we were trying to spend money to make sure the schools had more. There's, again, the university system. And then on top of that, you have the collegiate sports that people are paying attention to. And then the beaches, and then Asheville. But the whole mountains are great. But, everybody just zeroes in on Asheville. And then people love OBX. But, there's a lot of great hot water beaches as well. And then...
What?
Yeah, tip of the, like when you go past Wilmington, when the state kind of curves in, when you think about, for lack of a better imagery, you think about the gun of the state, and so the little part where there's like the trigger, like if you're actually past Wilmington, going towards Myrtle Beach,
okay,
that's where the hot water beaches start. So you got two options for water temperature there. You've got all that water. If you want more of a lake atmosphere, anything between the Outer Banks is game for action. You have all kinds of transportation. I mean, that's, there's well, maybe not as much as we could have. That would be that's a whole nother conversation, how transit and transportation and all of that. But just air quality, food quality, water quality, the water table itself, the drinking water table, as well as the food sources and what's available to eat naturally, as well as what's being promoted in, the labor around that, who gets to control those channels, and all of that's still very important. And that is, I think that's what we've touched on, whether it's coal ash or hog waste, you have these massive operations. And the sad part about the coal ash situation is that, that's our utility. That is our power utility, and It is a for-profit entity.
Yes. Yes. And one correction is I meant Duke Energy, not Dominion Power. Dominion Power is Virginia. But
but the names have changed so much.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of, because this it used to be Progress Energy and Duke Power. It was Duke Power when I was coming up, and then Progress. But it wasn't even Progress Energy. They had some other name that they used to call it. Like older elders, if you talk to them in Raleigh and down east, they'll talk about a different name for the power utility there. But, because they're for profit and they're trying to make profits, merging was something that was attractive to them. And so they've merged to the point where Duke Energy has a swath of the state, the central part of the state. And then they have entities in Ohio. And I've heard that similar things are happening in Ohio around some of their power plants. But then you also still have a handful of communities. I used to see a commercial when I still lived in Greensboro. There was this electric cooperative. Duke Energy does not control all of the power statewide, just like Spectrum doesn't control all of the telecommunications, like your cable company. Like different jurisdictions, some cities have fought and won the right to issue their own power utilities and their own telecommunications.
You're giving me an idea.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not even, and that's the thing. It's we've been talking more about North Carolina as a whole thing, but this is definitely truly now the water table being affected does affect the entire state. It affects if you're eating something from a Smithfield or a subsidiary, which also now includes, I think, Nathan's Hot Dogs. I think they bought so many people that they are also included in the whole lagress of this conglomerate. But, everybody eats statewide. We may not all grow or nurture these animals statewide, but we all eat statewide. So that still affects us. The water, it rains. The rain comes from up the coast. The hurricanes come inland. So all this stuff gets spread. And then on top of that, we all have cousins throughout the side of the state. So just seeing, again, another Black family at the mercy of on the one hand, at the mercy of this company, but on the other hand, probably wishing that they could be part of this, but never really getting a full opportunity to expand past the handful of hogs they had in their yard. Mm-hmm. So,
like another layer to this is we really have to think about is like, what is enough? Like, mm-hmm. And what I mean, and I know that sounds hippy dippy, but like, what is enough as far as to sustain a community? Because the reality is that we really have to consider that part of the myriad of problems is that there is such a mass transit dependent food system that it's not, because we're talking about Smithfield, which is everywhere. It's not just, it doesn't just ship locally. It's got different setups in the world. And why is that necessary? Couldn't we think a little bit differently and shift our thinking to a smaller, local, sustainable practice where farmers can have hogs do whatever they want with them, but using what their waste for fertilizer, as opposed to using fertilizer that is given by, unfortunately, the companies that own smaller farms. And that's the thing too that the article talks about, is that companies like Smithfield replaced these farms. They replaced these local census and operations of community, and that's just to put it out, that's a way that we really have to start to think if we are going to survive the end of days.
Yeah.
Gloom and doom.
Yeah.
I warned y'all. I said it was coming and it's here.
Yeah. And I can't thank you enough for just so for background. Some of you, I'm gonna re-release the original episode, but for those of you who are in Rashida's feed, you haven't heard me since the first episode, but I really want to take the opportunity to talk about how proud I am and how thrilled I am of these few episodes, how it's come together. Aww. And I for real, I mean, I'm not saying this because the mic is live, but really it's people are starting to ask about whether or not we have enough Black podcasts to talk about things besides fashion and beauty. And fashion and beauty and pop culture is great.
Oh, girl.
But there are other things that we
need to talk about. I mean, and it's like, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Because it's
no,
the
you're
truth.
not. Don't lie. Don't lie.
No, I'm not. I'm not knocking anybody's hustle. You get your money. But, we need to broaden the playing field. And I think that there is room. I'm not calling for anyone to diminish themselves. I'm just calling up and calling out and saying, for those of us who are out here and we know what's up, I'm not going to call us woke. I don't really like that word anymore. We know what's up. Mm-hmm. And we got a skill. Perhaps you're a farmer, or, you are a designer, an architect, whatever. Like, we have to start calling out, and so we can call each other in and become what is necessary to make change happen. Like, much like, I talked to Eric Range from Minorities for Medical Marijuana. That organization, he's a board member. They have nationwide membership and also trainings, everything possible. And these are the kinds of models that we as sustainability practitioners are going to have to start to utilize and really work with each other to uplift. So anyway, because I don't know if you know this about me, I don't like compliments. I appreciate it, I do, deep inside, but like on the outside I'm like, change the subject. So that's why
I mentioned this to Les, my partner, just recently. We have to, and I don't know, it's just been heavy on me lately, just how Black women are expected to, no matter who we date and how we present, we're expected to just be kind of there as mules and as like service.
Sorry.
Truly of service to people. Like you can laugh at it that way, but for a lot of, even though we think about our elders and we think about coming down from slavery onward, it's evolved, but it's like oftentimes we can't even engage in these serious topics because unfortunately we're the ones cleaning up after a lot of messes.
Yes.
I can imagine, and I knew my janitorial staff when I was at State was all Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just saw an article about a Black woman at the veterinary school who showed up for 26 years and only missed a day. And they were glorifying the fact that she only missed a day in a janitorial job. Now, we also have some wonderful Black faculty members, Black faculty women. We have Black women that are coordinating different departments. And we have Black women that are on our cafeteria lines and in our janitorial services. And they do get paid well. It is a state-funded job. But globally, unfortunately, in certain communities, we still have Black women who are expected to bear a lot of emotional labor, a lot of labor. And to think about being thought leaders and entertaining for the sake of entertaining for ourselves, but not entertaining as a shuck and jive, but entertaining because we derive joy.
Right.
We have to reclaim that. Yeah. And we also have to we have to get away from the stereotypes that have been placed on us. We can be those stereotypes, but we can also be other things, and it's that balance.
Yeah, and that's why, just again, I'm not knocking anybody's hustle. It's just that we create the culture. Like you probably saw on Twitter today that there's The Root put out a pretty stinging article about Pete Buttigieg.
Buttigieg, yeah.
Okay. I can't get it. That's not true. I'm gonna make it a concerted effort. As someone whose first name is always mispronounced, I'm gonna do better. But that's and what I mean to say to bring that up is to say that we have the capacity to shift the focus onto topics that concern us. We've seen that, and I think that's something we're gonna have to work on just as a collective to improve upon. It's just our full lace front, like being out on the front, on the front, to show the world, because these topics are important, and there's a lot of great work that's being done and advancements. Just like I posted it on Instagram about I post a lot of things. I think it was about in Africa there's a green band, like a green line that they've created, and why is that not being widely publicized? I mean, I know about it because I'm but why is that not something that we're uplifting and celebrating? And that's just the impetus behind me saying all these words, and also why I created this podcast in the first place.
Yeah, and for me, I created a platform because there were certain voices that were being silenced.
Right.
I kind of got away from the true mission. There's been more people are owning their Blackness. I started my platform before we had the movement for Black Lives. Not that there wasn't a movement for Black Lives, but the capital, the capital letters, Black Lives Matter, movement for Black Lives. Me Too she had been using that, but of course it hadn't gone viral. I myself was living in the closet and so deep in the closet I didn't realize I was living in the closet. I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't realize were coming back to the forefront. And in a decade of doing this and a decade of creating this kind of media, being able to express the importance of it being a media project, how we need media projects. Yeah. It isn't just drawing things. There's a need of written media as well as spoken media, as well as print media, that people need to get the word out and people need to be informed, and it's not going to go away. And it's not just information around what we've always informed each other around, but I am excited that we're now creating a media ecosystem. And we're able to take this episode and share it out amongst our networks, and of course being able to have these conversations. And I'm looking forward in the coming months to bring back these audio chats, and then also start doing more of these live and in person, and adding some entertaining elements to it, but still getting to the meat of having honest conversations. I'm looking forward to having my partner and her and I having our own episode talking about just that experience and how the queerness overlaps. I mean, I'm looking forward to having all these conversations again. I enjoy putting out the newsletter. I enjoy curating things. And really, it's just gone back to, instead of it being, hey, people who aren't Black or whatever else identities I'm here, hire me, is to come up, hey, you know, I'm me, I have this expertise, come and listen and talk with me for a little while. And this is a platform, this is a place to be, this is somewhere where you should stop by. I wouldn't say every once in a while. I say stop by when you can.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of important things that are being done on these platforms.
Exactly. And I'm, you know, as we're closing down, we said this at least twice. That's okay.
Oh, of course.
Of course, you know, that's how it goes. But, you know, that is one thing I am so appreciative to, you know, to know you and to be a part of, you know, what you're building, and for you to be a part of what I'm building. And that is the step, the right step in the right direction, you know, towards collective resource, collective work, you know, and collective ownership too. So, and it's a great model. It's a great thing and I'm very grateful that, you know, I can have this with you. So
yes,
tell everybody where they can follow you. Anything you got coming down the pike that you want to shout out, now's the time to do it.
At Black Urbanist on Instagram and Twitter, at Chris Pattern. You can follow both. You can subscribe to both newsletters at theblackurbanist.com and chrispattern.com. The Black Urbanist is more focused on urban design and built environment design. Chris Pattern gets in the nitty gritty of like my handicrafting and DIY type stuff. That's part of why those two things are separate entities right now. And down the line, I am looking to add more guest commentary on the Black Urbanist radio show. I'm looking to create what I'm calling the Black Urbanist Experience, which will be kind of the evolution of my these podcasts, as well as the website and live shows and live lectures. If you're interested in booking me, my 2020 calendar is wide open. Please do reach out to me at Les at the Black Urbanist. My partner handles all my bookings as far as booking me to do speeches and do workshops. So again, if you're looking for me to do that kind of thing, Les at theblackurbanist.com. And just a heads up for anybody who's listening, who's thinking about commissioning me to do written work. I basically am not accepting pitches or any invitations to do written work at the moment. You can still send it if it's really compelling. We will consider it, but the priority for 2020 is doing these podcasts, doing the newsletter, doing the live experience, and then me doing private lectures, in addition, of course, helping Les's with her stuff over at the Les's Lighthouse. So
okay. And as always, my podcast is available on where is it? It's everywhere. It's on YouTube. It's on SoundCloud. YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Links are in my bios on my Instagram and on my Twitter. My Instagram is at Crossroads Podcast, and my funky Twitter handle is Crossroads Pod C, like the letter C, and the number 1. Soup's weird. And again, Kristen, thank you so much for joining me. This is a great conversation, a great topic, and as always, we have a good time when we get together and chop it up. So
we really do. In person, out of person, just thanks for your support, and it's been a thrill to be able to somewhat EP this and produce this, and I'm glad we're at it again.
Yeah.
So that was the last episode of the year. Thank you all again for joining me. Couple announcements, couple shout outs before I go. So one of the things that I want to work on for 2020 and the future is zero waste. Now that's going to be hard, and let me quantify that a little bit. So I really want to work on eliminating my use of plastics as much as I possibly can. Composting is going to be difficult, which would be of course part of zero waste for me. So that'll be tough. We don't have composting where I live, and I'd have to I could put it in the woods, but that's too much. So I am working on that. I'm interested in working on that. If anyone has any tips for what they've done to eliminate plastics, specifically single-use plastics, out of their routines, please let me know. Hit me up on Twitter, DM me on Instagram. I want to know what you learned, what your successes were, what some things you couldn't quite get rid of in your life. Let me know. And you can use the hashtag WasteNot2020, and we'll keep up with each other and see how that's progressing. And this year, just to kind of recap back over this year, which has been just the biggest blessings have happened this year, and inclusive of working on this podcast. And, we covered a lot of topics from agriculture to mobility justice and education, specifically green education. And, as I'm working towards the future of this, because this is definitely something, even after all the great things that came together, even some of the things that weren't so great, that didn't work, I have thoroughly enjoyed working on this podcast this year. And so some of the things that I want to continue to do in the new year is to make this space as inclusive as possible, get as many voices as possible to discuss what they've been working on, to discuss themselves. That's important to me. So that's definitely something I want to maintain. So do not hesitate to connect with me. I'm open, surprisingly, just given my nature at times. I'm open to talking to folks and really wanting to connect and see what's going on in your community, see how we can uplift an issue that you're facing, an issue from the past that hasn't necessarily been addressed. Let me know. So shout outs. First of all, shout out to these two hands that made it through this year of having to edit this podcast by myself. But on a serious note, this podcast would not have been possible without the intervention of people, strangers, from the internet. So first of all, the person who created my logo for me, Mickey Boom, her website is Okay So Boom, and I believe her first name is Michaela, helped me to do my logo. I heard about her on the Friend Zone podcast, and I immediately reached out to her to ask her to help me to come up with the logo. And what she came up with was beautiful and encompasses exactly what's important about the show, what's the meat and potatoes, plant-based meat of the show. Second is someone named, or her handle on Instagram and all platforms is And She Creates. Shout out to her. She has helped not only me, but several other podcasters all across the country. And we have our own super group that we record with, and shout out to everybody that's a part of that. We need to come up with a catchy name, and I'm going to put that on myself to do. But yes, And She Creates does self-promotion for YouTubers, for podcasters, everyone. She's an amazing person and an amazing resource. So I had to shout out to her because what I've been able to do, the audience that I have reached, I do owe some of that definitely to her intervention and her support. And I think that's all for I think that's all my shout outs. But that's enough. And shout out to all the interviewees, everybody who worked with me to be a part of the show, who took the time out of their days and their schedules to be guests on my show. They did that just out of the kindness of their heart. Shout out to the Black Sustainability Network, who has been a supporter of the show and was able to give me some of the guests that I had on this show. The direction of it really changed because of Afia Reina's intervention. So shout out to her as well. See, this is what happens. This is what I'm talking about when I say collective ownership, collective support. I would not be able to do this completely on my own. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody who I've mentioned. Thank you to the ones that I might have forgotten. I appreciate everyone who's picked up the phone and listened to me complain. And, I appreciate all my listeners. Thank you guys. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the new year has in store. I hope you guys have your vision boards together. I got mine together, and I'm excited and looking forward to the future. So I'll see you all in the new year.